This morning I thought we would look at 1 Timothy chapter 1, just because we've had a few lectionary readings on Sunday from Timothy, plus we talked about an earlier passage last week in 1 Timothy. I thought, well, let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 1, down towards the end of the chapter, 18 through 20. As always, I am open to other topics, or you'll be stuck with mine. So if you have something you would really like to discuss, let me know. Otherwise, you get the things I think about.
Well, they break your own, or you get mine. Right?
Yeah.
Timothy 1, 1 Timothy 1.
1 Timothy chapter 1, I'm going to begin in verse 18. So it was last week we were up at the beginning of the chapter, and the meditation came from the middle of this chapter last week, because that's where the lectionary has us right now in 1 Timothy. So I thought this, beginning in verse 18, because the lectionary reading that I spoke on last Sunday ended in verse 17. But let's read 18 through 20. This command I entrust to you, Timothy, my son, in accordance with the prophecies previously made concerning you, that by them you fight the good fight, keeping faith and a good conscience, which some have rejected and suffered shipwreck in regard to their faith. Among these are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan, so that they will be taught not to blaspheme. So the part we looked at last week was verse 5, or we kind of focused there, where he lists these three things. The goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. You had that, which I think is kind of a very important statement summarizing, hey, you want to know what the goal of Christian teaching is? It's these three things. Boil it down. It's these things. It's really one thing, love, coming from these three aspects of our own selves. Right? But there's something similar here at the end, in verses 18, 19, and 20. So let me just start then. We can start our discussion by what parts of this reading, these three verses, maybe jumped out at you that made you think, I wonder what that is. And kind of looking for questions before answers. It's too easy for us to go right through the answers. Let's go with the questions. Does anything puzzle you about what he says 18, 19, and 20?
Hand it over to Satan.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty. What in the world does that mean? I mean, that's a great question, because what does he mean? What does that mean? So that's one question.
Did Jaime and Alexander know they would be in the Bible?
And in such a poor way. I mean, it'd be one thing to be in there like some are, as
versus
yeah, like the widow, the two mites, we don't know her name, but forever people are saying there was this woman, did this great. These guys are in there as examples of, ooh boy, they did.
I wonder, like where it says keeping faith and a good conscience, two separate things. In a way, I'm not quite sure what that means. In a way, I think of faith as me actually implementing my strong convictions.
Right.
Well, now back to conscience.
Yeah.
But the separation of that kind of, I don't know. It looks a little confusing.
Okay, that's a good question. What's the role? Because, like I mentioned back in verse 5, he mentions good conscience. And I think we sometimes need to do a kind of a deep dive into what is a conscience? What is conscience? I mean, we kind of hear that term. It's like, isn't it kind of what prods me when I'm doing wrong? Well, that's part of it, but there's a lot more to it than simply it's the thing that goes, Greg, you shouldn't be doing that. I mean, that is my conscience doing that. But there's more to it than simply that part of me that points out I'm in the wrong. So that comes up again. Yeah, why is it separated from faith? Why are those two? Any other questions?
What are the prophecies?
What are the prophecies?
In verse 8?
Yeah. And how do they function? Because what's interesting to me that I notice when I'm looking at this command I entrust to you, Timothy, my son, in accordance with the prophecies previously made concerning you, that by them you fight the good fight. We're all familiar with, fight the good fight language, and Paul in 2 Timothy says, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the course, I've run the race. Well, here he says, which I thought was interesting, it's by those prophecies he then is to fight the good fight. So then that really says, well, what in the world are the prophecies, and how does that fit into him undergoing this kind of struggle? And what is the struggle? What is the fight? There's a lot of good questions in here, right? Does that make sense? It's easy to read, and then you say, well, what is the fight he's fighting? What are the prophecies, and how do they function as making that possible?
What does it mean to shipwreck your faith?
Yeah, what does that mean? Because I certainly don't want to do that.
I imagine that's the equivalent of, we call people a train wreck. They didn't have trains back then. It's a shipwreck.
Camel wreck or?
Yeah.
You need to ask Hymenaeus and Alexander what a shipwreck.
Yeah. What does it look like when you've shipwrecked your faith, guys? And do they know they've shipwrecked their faith? That would be a good question. Bet Alexander doesn't think he has.
It sounds like they don't, because he links it to the conscience being shipwrecked, right?
They're not aware.
Yeah, so there's a connection there to what Daryl brought up. You keep faith and good conscience, which some have rejected. So by rejecting faith and a good conscience, that's how they've shipwrecked their faith. Or in regard to their faith, mine puts it. Yeah. Well, let's start with the first one that nobody's asked yet. What's the command? Starts in verse 18. This command I entrust to you.
Fight the battle well. That's what mine.
As a topic heading?
Oh, no, that's not really the command, is it?
Nope. You know what I think the command is? Verse 5. Because some translations will render verse 5, but the goal of our command is love from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. And it's the exact same word in Greek. I hate this when translators decide to take the same word from one verse and a few verses later and render it differently in English, and it obscures the fact that there's a connection there. I mean, I'm okay with not using the word command, because command sort of sounds like an edict. Like, this is it, you must do. And for a lot of us, a command implies or else. Like, the commands of Scripture always came with the threat of punishment. It's the way I grew up. Commands were like, do it or else. In verse 5, Paul doesn't mean or else. Instruction's a good translation, but then translate it that way in 18, so we know, oh, this is the instruction. Right? So I think if we start working through these verses, the goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart, good conscience, sincere faith. Verse 5. He talks about that middle part that was subject of the meditation last week. Then he comes back down in verse 18. This instruction about love from a good conscience, a pure, this instruction I have entrusted to you. Like, this is the goal of Christian instruction. And Timothy, I've left you there with that entrusted to you. Continue this work, this good instruction. All right? I think that's the sense of it.
Hey, Timothy, shower the people with love.
Teach them how to love. Make it come from a good conscience and a clean heart, right? Okay, so this commandment, I think that goes back to 5. There are other opinions, but that one's mine. I've entrusted to you, Timothy, my son. Now here's the second part that Mark was asking about. In accordance with the prophecies previously made concerning you. Okay. Any thoughts about what he's referring to? I mean, I don't think we know specifically. But in general, what do you think he's referring
unloving thing?
No, I don't think it's that. What are the prophecies that were made about Timothy? This was a kind of more in the ancient world than in our contemporary world, but maybe sometimes it still happens. But you remember when Jacob blessed all of his sons? And to Judah he said, the scepter will never depart from between your legs. You will be the son from whom the kings come, the tribe of Judah, right? He pronounces over each son a kind of blessing, but it's also kind of a prophecy. It's about who they will be. I wish we did more of this in our society if we would do that. I think it's important to speak over our children and over others a positive view of what is possible by God's grace. Too often we just stick to what is the reality of their present. Son, you're just difficult. What if you...
Kind of like all the places you'll go. Remember that?
Yeah. What if we say something like, I see in you someday the possibility that you will be a person who does X, Y, and Z. It's kind of in that Israelite tradition, it's pronouncing a blessing, but the blessing is really weighted on the confidence that God will grow you to be this. This is who you will become. It's not who you are now. And so I think it's a lot of times it's important to, not only for our children, but for others, to say what we see possible and not to simply delineate what we see is the reality now.
And from a divine, because it's a divine affirmation, right?
Right. It's the
Not pull
confidence.
yourself up by your bootstraps and try harder, right?
Yeah, it's not you. It's this idea that, and that's why this prophecy, things were said about Timothy, about who, I don't know who said it. Was it Paul? Was it others who knew him as a young man? Some things were said about Timothy that were prophetic, like, and not like future telling, like someone had a vision. I see you on January 25th. You're doing it. It's more like, Timothy, you are going to be. I see in you someone who can be a teacher and a nurturer of others, a pastoral sort of figure. Someone said that. And Paul's affirming, hey, remember what was said, live into it. Someone saw that potential in you. And now I'm saying I've entrusted to you this instruction and what it means, and I want you to continue in it because that, you see a consistency between things that were said about who you will become and now what I'm entrusting you. See, all of it's fitting together. He's growing into being someone. Now, remember, this is a guy, Paul also says, well, the Lord has not given us a spirit of timidity. Right. Little pun, probably doesn't work in Greek. It's not a Greek pun. But so, this is also the young man who sometimes feels unsure, and Paul says, don't let anyone despise your youth. God has not given us the spirit. Step out. So he's casting a vision for Timothy. You can do this. You can teach. And not only I've said it, others have said it. Live into that spiritual vocation.
How do you do that, though, Greg, as a parent? I know exactly what you're saying. I want to bless them and not look at them with the critique.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is funny just in what I'm doing right now, I specifically said that about one of the clients, one of the guys that you also know, and just said, you have so much potential, what you're doing from a leadership and character
Right.
and faith perspective, you could be an entrepreneur today, or you could be, so much more than you are, and keep on the path and be,
Right.
Be patient in that. That's a lot harder to say to my sons and daughters.
Yeah.
It just seems, so how do you do that with your kids?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. It's kind of casting a vision for what is possible and what you, by your own faith in what God can do, believe to be possible. And that's where maybe it's not great to get super specific because you don't know whether they'll do this or that, in a super specific way. But you could still say, I see you as a person with a good heart, and I see you doing good things and blessing the lives of others. See, that's a kind of general blessing. You're not saying, and I see you doing that through working with school kids, and they decide not to be a teacher. You don't want to I failed the prophecy. No, and that's where it should be more general, because I think everyone in some way is to serve others. So you can speak generally, I see you in service to others, and maybe I see you, but you keep it general enough so that it can be worked out in any number of incarnations. Does that make sense?
The Spirit will work on you.
Right, right. But you can, that's all I know. But it's that idea of being positive about who they can become, not negative about who they are. Because someone can be negative about who I am at the moment. I would rather them help me think about who I could be, not my present failings. Right?
I think this all begins with the name you give your child.
Yeah.
I just love when families are intentional about the naming of their children, I think, because I don't think I've ever had a prophecy about myself, but I have the name Ron, which is from Reginald, which means royal leader.
Yeah.
And so as I've discovered what Ron means over the years, it's encouraged me. It's kind of like, you're expected to be a good leader.
Right. Yeah, that kind of thing. And in most Christian traditions, people take a name at their baptism. They choose a name. And I mean, everyone did that in Africa. I didn't start it. They already were aware, but they do that all the time in Africa. I mean, you're given a name by your parents, but that you change it later. So one guy I knew was Sanane, which means 2 o'clock. I guess that was the time he was born. But he chose the name Onesimus, right? So everyone, when they became a Christian, they chose a biblical figure as a kind of, this is who I want to be like. I want to be, this person. It wasn't the birth name they were given. Of course, they have less problems, well, they probably don't today, but back then, there wasn't any legal paperwork that you had to go through to change the name. You just said, I'm now so-and-so, and everyone accepted it. You didn't have to go file it with the government. The government didn't even know you existed. You weren't probably on any roll, right? But that's the idea. What if, and I like that as a practice. I'm going to mandate it, but I like that as a practice. Do you choose, as it were, a patron saint, a biblical figure, and say, this is the person I aspire to be like? I kind of feel called to be a Joseph, or I feel called to be a Benjamin, or I feel called to be, a Moses or an Elijah. That's ancient Christian practice, right? For centuries, Christians have done that. So the giving of names, the adopting of a name, that's the type of thing. What was Timothy's name? What's Paul's name? He used to be Saul, a Jewish name. But now he's Paul, a Greek name, a Greek version of the Jewish name, because he's an apostle to the Gentiles, so now his name is Paul. He's become the Paul. He's no longer Saul the Pharisee, he's Paul the evangelist to Gentiles, to Greeks.
To my comment earlier,
Yeah.
Paul, I think, is sort of like what I did with Michael. I can use the first name, keep it anonymous. Like with Michael, Timothy probably viewed Paul as being objective because he wasn't his son, and so I guess that's where, with your children, it's like, oh, Dad, yeah, you're the best, you're the greatest,
Right.
You'll be really good at this. Oh, you're just, so I think it is challenging, but I like what you were saying, and that, be more generic. Don't be,
Don't lock them into if you don't follow this specific path, then you'll have missed, my vision but yeah, maybe hopefully we're not the only people speaking positively into their life, but it's the whole idea of, can you speak more positively about them than who they actually are? But is that not what God is doing with us? You are my beloved. Well, they're going to act like his beloved. In whom I am well pleased. I really believe the statement that the Father makes to the Son at his baptism is to be heard as God's statement to each one of us at our baptism. Or constantly. We are the beloved of God in whom he is well pleased. And a lot of times I have trouble believing he's actually well pleased with me. And I've got good reasons to think he can't be well pleased with me. But he insists he is. Right? Because it's as if God is speaking a blessing over me. I'm his beloved and he's pleased with me. And it encourages me to live up to that rather than feeling like I'm being, scolded, like you're not good enough. Right? You'd better live up to it because otherwise, I prepared a place for people like you. That's the fear and trembling I grew up with. It didn't move me in any good way. Okay, so that seems to be what's going on. But let's look at the last part. The prophecies previously made concerning you, that by them you fight the good fight. So what is he saying? That by them, by the prophecies, you fight the good fight. So what's Timothy supposed to do with what's been said?
Bold, be bold, live into it.
Yeah.
Step up.
It's like keep coming back and rely on these things. Just come back to them when he's timid Timothy, and feeling put down because of his youth or whatever. It's like look back at those prophecies. Those are your anchor points, and by them you continue this struggle. What's the struggle? I don't know. What could the struggle be? Timothy probably knows, but we don't. But what do we think it could be?
Sounds like he has to confront some people who think they know more than they do.
Yeah. The struggle might be keeping that instruction to this Christian instruction of love out of a pure heart. This is your task. I've entrusted it to you. You've got to continue the struggle. It's not easy because some people discounting for his youth or don't believe that's the center of the gospel. They're into the endless genealogies and the myths and the stuff that he talked about in the middle is like, that'll just get you off track. That's not what it's about. So he's got to struggle I think the struggle might be to keep this mode of instruction that's been entrusted to him. That's not easy to do.
Struggle is mostly self-reliance, isn't it, rather than God?
Well, and yeah, that would be another aspect of, I didn't even think of that one. Yeah, the struggle to actually trust these promises rather than to trust in yourself. Yeah, that's interesting. That's certainly a part of his struggle. It has to be. It's part of all of it. I like that.
Struggling with the self-will of just getting down to do something. It's more about dying to self and throwing yourself into God all the way is where that love comes from.
Right. Yeah. And somewhat, right, in the fighting the good fight in 19 is keeping faith and a good conscience. That's part of the struggle, I think. Fight the good fight. Keeping faith. Timothy has trouble keeping the faith. Timothy has trouble keeping a good conscience about things. Seems like that's part of the struggle. That's part of the fight. You got to fight the fight of keeping the faith and keeping a good conscience. So I think it's these other things. Certainly, I love Bob's idea of it's the temptation of self-reliance. I think part of it is the teaching. He's got people he's trying to teach, and some of them think they know more than they do, and they're into endless genealogies and myths. And he's trying to stay focused on it. It's about this love of God.
I thought it might be that he was in fear of his life for preaching that gospel, and maybe he was. But is it true? I just was Googling it, that Timothy actually, died at a very old age. He was martyred, but it was an old. I always thought it was like circa the time he was preaching with Paul. But
No, it's
yeah,
no.
yeah, way later, which
Yeah, I don't know.
I didn't know that.
Right.
I mean, it's not taught, but I thought he was martyred at a young age, and so, there might be fear. But
Yeah, I don't know, yeah, I don't know at this point that it's kind of a fear for his own safety. He's trying to teach in the churches, and there's a lot of other teaching going on, and people despise him because he's young, and it's hard to try and steer a bunch of chickens in the same direction. It's like herding chickens or herding cats. That's what he's doing. They're all over the place, and he's trying to focus them on good conscience, pure heart, love. They're all over the place, right?
We don't have any, I'm sorry, we don't have any letters from Timothy to Paul, do we? So I wonder if Timothy was in charge of Hymenaeus and Alexander. I don't know.
Could have been. It might. Yeah, we need to get to that in a minute. What is that about?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that would be interesting if Timothy's been working really to bring these two in, and Paul's kind of like, look, at a certain point you just got to let go and wait for them to come back. I have learned, do not chase people who are going away from you. They're not inclined to listen anyway. If they turn their back and going away from you, they're not interested,
They made a decision.
yeah, but if someone comes to you and says, help me, or explain to me, or I'm confused, they're asking for assistance. I don't know that Jesus, and when I look in the Gospels, I never see a passage where it says that Jesus was walking along and he saw a man doing something he shouldn't and decided to intervene. Every conversation of Jesus with an individual, that individual comes to Jesus with a question or a situation or something. That person comes to Jesus. Now, Jesus will speak to the crowds, and the crowds again have come, and they may like what they hear or don't like what they hear. But when it comes to individuals, each person, Jesus doesn't spend time running down people. He spends time with the people who come to him with a question. And then he gives them an answer or direction. Sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. But they came, right? He didn't force it on them. They asked. And he said, well, here's what you need to do. Right? So, I don't know. But we're getting a little bit into that. Well, let's... keeping faith and a good conscience, that's a throwback to verse 5, right? I think that's something Timothy has to work on, but he's also trying to help others keep it. He's trying to keep it and trying to help them keep it.
Could this be a faith in himself? Faith in the prophecy, you could say. A faith in his role. In a way, it's still faith.
It's still
God.
faith in God. No, I like that. Yeah, in his
the
personal
conscience.
case, yeah,
Feeling okay about asserting himself.
yeah. Because you want to act in a good conscience. To act in a bad conscience is to do what you know to be wrong, or at least believe to be wrong. Sometimes you might believe it to be wrong and it's not wrong. But
Right.
yeah, so, but I like that. Maybe the keeping faith in his case is to trust the prophecies that have been made. You keep on when you're doubting about you being a pastoral figure and you're thinking, I can't do this. Right? I think that might be, yeah, I like that. Keeping the faith is trusting those words of blessing and prophecy.
Because it can be hard if you are timid or inclined, not sure yet.
Mm.
Am I right enough to come down hard? Sometimes we need that encouragement, and it does give you. I think it feels to me a lot when I'm in that sort of situation, like the same twinge of conscience I would get from anything else, that it is a conscience matter, like that it might bother me to be stepping up. I would doubt myself more if I'm having this. So I think having this, there is a relationship, I think, between how much trust you put in the matter, in this case, in his own understanding of God and his own role here, that Paul is, I could see that being really central to Timothy's need to step up in this situation.
And
I hope that makes sense.
I have it Googled Hymenaeus and Alexander. But it makes me wonder, were they, like Timothy, kind of entrusted servants, pastoral figures, who didn't keep the faith? Right? It doesn't mean they were malcontents, that they had trouble kind of keeping them on the straight and narrow, and these guys were maybe they were like Timothy, people of promise over whom prophecies were spoken, who didn't hold to it. So maybe in some ways it's like they're part of his graduating class, like they're Timothy's peers. Think about those other two guys who just had as much promise as you do, but they didn't keep the faith. You know, I don't know. Because I'm confessing, I've always thought, well, these guys were difficult from the beginning, and they've had trouble keeping them, doing good, and so finally it's like, Alexander and Hymenaeus, they're just so prone to evil. But maybe it's the opposite. I like that.
That might be so they will be taught not to blaspheme. They're going against what's been prophesied as truth.
Right. Yeah. Blasphemy, I like to define it this way. It's either to call something God that is not God, or to deny that something that is God is God. That's blasphemy. You can say a lot of incorrect stuff. That's not blasphemy. Blasphemy is when you say, that's God, but it's not God. Or as Jesus says about the people who said, you have an evil spirit. He says, that's blasphemy, because the Spirit of God is in me and you've called it evil. To call something that is God, not God, or to call something that is not God, God, that's blasphemy. Everything short of that is just, you got it wrong. Right? In other words, it's not easy to blaspheme. Everyone's not going around blaspheming. It's not swearing. It's not four-letter words. That's not blasphemy. Okay, Daryl, and then we're going to stop.
This probably isn't what he means, but I was just thinking, we've all been given prophecy away.
Right.
Of your neighbor. All I'm thinking is, we live up to that prophecy, then that may be also involved.
Yeah, that's a great point. In some ways, has not prophetic things been said over all of us? Well, you are members of the body of Christ, right? You are to love your neighbor. Things have been said prophetically over all of us if we're believers. So are we living up to? So quickly, my sense in 20, turning them over to Satan. I don't think it's a euphemistic way. It's a poetic way of saying. I think of him saying, I just realized I've got to let go with regards to those two guys. I can't keep pursuing them. I just got to let things go for the time being. Now, does Paul stand ready to welcome them back when they come back sheepishly and go, okay, I shipwrecked. I'm a train wreck. Well, of course he is. He's going to be like the father waiting for the prodigal, but the father lets the prodigal go. And I think that's all Paul means. It's not like, turning them over to Satan doesn't mean any sort of thing beyond that. I think it's just like, these two guys are wanting to go their own way. I've let them go. Now, I know what's going to happen. Where they're going, they're not going to be cared for, right? They're going to the pig pen, euphemistically. They're going into the arms of Satan. I'll be here when they want to come back. But basically, Timothy, I've had to let him go, right? And maybe Timothy has to let some things go too, right? Because you can try too hard. And sometimes you got to say, the Holy Spirit will do this if I'll just sit back and let the Holy Spirit do his work. I can't do it. But the Holy Spirit can do it. Bring them back. All right.
I Googled for you.
What is
For opponents of Paul, those false teachers. So
that's the traditional.
been hanging.
Yeah, that's the traditional kind of thing. Yeah. Which might mean Paul said, I've tried to convince those guys and correct them and work with them, and I finally had to say, look.
You could read that last sentence to say that Satan's going to teach them not to blaspheme. That's why I handed them over.
Right. If you spend enough time with the devil, you might decide, like the prodigal son, maybe it was better back there at home.
Maybe it wasn't so bad.
Right? Yeah, because the blasphemy could be, against Paul, they've said Paul does not have the Spirit of the Lord. Well, that's speaking not against Paul, that's speaking against the Spirit that dwells.
It's not the true apostle.
Right. So if that's what they were doing, then yeah, they were blaspheming. They were saying the spirit that dwells in Paul is not the spirit of God. If that's the essence of what they're doing, then yeah, they blaspheme. And Paul says, I gotta let him go. You know, I've tried to, I would think he's tried to convince them, turn them around, but they won't do it. I think one of these guys shows up in another letter and he's
They're both, well,
It
some
annotates
people say
both
they're
of them.
both in Second
Yeah.
Timothy. There's an Alexander Coppersmith in Second Timothy, and then another person named Hymenaeus in Second Timothy. But is it the exact same person? Probably, but it's not super clear.
right.
That's
Yeah.
what Google said too.
Yeah. So they show up. You know, it's interesting. All right.
This
We'll
is
stop.
Ephesus was larger.
We'll stop there.
Fascinating.
Hope you can stay for the meal.